Now, components of communication. This is very important topic of effective business communication. Basically, if these components of communication are derived from the definition of communication from given by Murphy et al. If we go back to the definition which we have studied in the start, that is, communication is a process of transmitting and receiving verbal and non-verbal messages, and communication is considered effective when it achieves the desired reaction or response from the receiver. Simply stated, communication is a two-way process of exchanging ideas or information. Here, in this way, from this definition, we can see there are different components of communication. Like there should be a sender, a receiver, a message, and a message delivered in a way that it achieves the desired result, which was intended by the sender. So, and there should be exchange of ideas and or information. It means that a receiver also gives back feedback to the sender in response of that generation of the communication, in response of the process of that communication. So these are the components of communication includes six components, which are context, sender or encoder, receiver or decoder, message itself, the medium through which the message is transmitted from the sender and is received by the receiver, and feedback is given by the receiver in response of that communication. That feedback can be a reply response or a reply to that, or it can be a reaction reaction in response of that communication. Maybe if the sender has ordered some goods from the company, the company simply delivers the goods to the sender. So in this way, communication is given so that it is the the process is completed basically. So feedback is very important. Here we will see one by one every component. Number one is sender or source. Okay, source, the source from which the communication is originated. Before going to sender, I want you to first go to the context of communication, which is very important. Context. What is context? Context is the situation in which your message is delivered is the context. Context could be a classroom, a lecture hall, can be like cinema hall, shopping mall, wherever. If you are communicating is in a classroom, would be very much different from you are communicating with your friend even in a cinema hall while watching movie. So this may include the surrounding environment or broader culture, corporate culture, international cultures, and so on. So surrounding environment can be in broader way. It can be which country you are in, which environment you are in, which culture you are in. Then in minor like context, it can be where you are in classroom, you are in lecture theater, you are in you are talking to a shopkeeper, you are doing shopping, and you are sitting in a hall for watching movie, you are sitting in a stadium to watch match. So everywhere you will communicate according to the context. Every message, whether written or oral, it begins with context. So context is a broader field that includes, in broader sense, it includes country, culture, organization, and internal organization, and external and internal stimuli. So every country, every culture, every company or organization has its own conventions for processing and communicating information. So, for example, in one organization, there are few terminologies and shortcuts which are understood by the students or by the persons or anyone, customers, and any person associated with the organization, they know only those shorthands, those conventions. For example, in Allama Iqbal Open University, the students associated with Allama Iqbal Open University, they know what is assignment form is called Parat or assignment form. So like anyone else who would not be, who is not, who does not belong to Allama Iqbal Open University, they would not be knowing about what is the procedure of that. And then being the student of Allama Iqbal Open University, you know the link, yeah, and the learning management system LMS as Olive. You know the Olive is what? Every student of Allama Iqbal Open University who is at distant learning mode, in online education mode, they would be familiar of Olive, but anybody outside the organization of Allama Iqbal Open University would not be knowing those conventions. So every country, every culture, every company or organization has its own conventions for processing and communicating information, and this should be kept in mind while communicating. Where you are, you should communicate according to those aspects. This aspect of context is playing field on which you must plan, design. While planning, while designing and communicating your message, and for communicating your message successfully, we should uh, take in mind the context of the aspect of context. So another aspect of context is external stimulus. External stimulus is that promotes you to send a message. That what is the reason that making you compelling you to start this communication. So the source of this prompt may be a letter, a memo, a note, email, fax, telex, telephone call, meeting, or even a casual conversation. So your response to this prompt can be oral. It means there could be any stimulus which is generating this communication by you. So that could be any reason. So your response to this prompt can be oral or you written. For example, there comes a announcement or news or a meeting. After that you want to start a communication to someone else, so it can be oral or written. It can also be an internal stimuli, like uh, internal stimuli have a complex influence on how you translate your ideas into message. So internal stimuli is your own brain is giving idea or is compelling you to communicate. So here you communicate your idea into message. When you encode your idea into message, your own point of view of the world affects the choices you make in language. So your attitudes, opinions, emotions, your past experiences, likes and dislikes, education, job status, and confidence in your communication skills all influence the way you communicate your ideas. So especially important is your ability to analyze your receiver's culture. So if you are good enough to analyze your audience, then you would be good enough to communicate your ideas well. So yeah, especially important is your ability to analyze your receiver's culture, receiver's point of view, receiver's needs, skills, status, mental ability, experience, and expectation. So you must consider all these aspects of context in order to communicate a message effectively. So now coming back to the components, and this another component is, which is very important, is sender or source itself. You So when you send a message, you are encoder, whether you are writer or speaker. If you are doing written communication, you are writer. If you are doing oral communication, you are speaker, so you are sender. So you, as a sender, you try to choose usually words and symbols, sometimes graphics or also pictures that express your message. So so that the receiver will understand it and react with the response you desire. So after considering all the factors mentioned above, like you must decide the which symbols best convey your message, and which message channel will be the most effective among the oral and written media. So uh, As a sender, you should choose those symbols and ideas that best express your message and create the desired response. So you should keep in mind, our communication is effective only when we achieve the desired response. And what is encoding? Encoding is transferring the ideas you want to communicate into a form that can be sent and correctly decoded at the other end. Your success in encoding depends partly on your ability to convey information clearly and simply. Make your communication simple. Nowadays, people want to add difficult words and difficult connotation, difficult terms and metaphors in order to make your communication, your writing or your speech more attractive by adding difficult words. No, this is not communication. Basic idea of communication is not to impress someone. The basic idea of communication is to make the other people understand the exact idea you wanted to communicate. You want to achieve the desired result as a result of communication. So a key part of this is knowing your audience. Failure to understand who you are communicating with will result in delivering messages that are misunderstood. So another second a component according to this sequence is message. The message is the information that you want to communicate. So you must first decide what's the main point of your message and what other information should to be included. So the message is the core idea you want to communicate. It consists of both verbal, written or spoken symbols, non-verbal, unspoken symbols. Examples are in communicating while road signs. Road signs are also messages given to traffic to drivers by the traffic management, like 500 meters ahead there is a sharp turn, there is a bridge, uh, there is a wind area, and also these signs communicate very clearly without any word written or spoken. So a speed limit notice speed limit signboards are etc. So you first task is to decide what exactly your message is and what content to include. So you must consider your context, as we have discussed earlier, and especially the receiver of the message, that how the receiver will interpret it. You should know the psychology, you should know the ability, you should know the experience, you should know the status of your receiver before communicating, how the receiver will interpret it, how it may affect your relationship. So a simple answer to a request for information may be relatively easy, in contrast to a message explaining why a company is moving some of its manufacturing from Islam from Rawalpindi to Karachi, or a proposal to build a new headquarters for a governmental agency will require more complex, carefully planned communication strategies. So a simple answer to a request for information is easy. You just give the required information, but explaining is a carefully planned communication strategy is required. Then is medium. Medium is the channel of communication. Your medium can be printed media, printed words, emails, or sound. So your message channel depends on all the contextual factors which we have discussed earlier, and the nature of message itself. So your choice include email, printed word, or sound. So briefly, like you should decide, like you should be speaking, or you are writing. So like message content, the choice of medium is influenced by the relationship between sender and receiver also. So what are the factors upon which choice of medium depends? Number one, it depends on the message itself. Number two, it depends upon the relationship between the sender and receiver. Some researchers suggest that the urgency of a message is also a primary factor in whether to choose the written or spoken media. So you may also consider factors like importance, number of receivers, cost, amount of information. If the message goes to an international audience, you must consider which medium is preferred in the receiver's culture. Uh, Based on the in on these things, if we summarize the factors which determine the communication channel, are: number one, message itself; number two, the relationship between sender and receiver; number three, the urgency or time factor of communication also decides medium. Number four, importance. Number five, number of receivers. So if number of receivers are more, then you would not be choosing a letter or something. You would be choosing a meeting. Okay. For example, classroom teaching, number of receivers are more, so you would be using a lecture medium for communication. Then number five, cost. If you want, you want to communicate at lower cost, then you would not be arranging um, a physical existence of all the audience at some place. So another is amount of information, and another factor is in international communication, you decide the medium according to receiver's culture. Like if the we are communicating with the internationally, and receiver's culture is basically email communication, so that would be preferred. There are few like I am sharing few merits and demerits of both written and oral communication, because basically the medium is written or oral. uh, After that we decide in written what, letter, email, or what, and in oral whether talking, meeting, or lecture. So in oral communication, there are merits and demerits, and in written communication also merits and demerits. So both have few merits and demerits. So oral communication gives you immediate feedback, like you are talking in face to face with with both sender and receiver. So when sender says something, the receiver gets the message, comprehends, and speaks back immediately, and the receiver all again, and the sender again responds to the receiver's message, and like whatever talk they are doing. So immediate feedback, but in written, delayed feedback. In oral, shorter sentences and shorter words, but in written, longer sentences and longer words. Oral is conversational, and written is more formal. Oral is simpler constructions, but in written is usual for permanent record, detailed documentation. So and it has more complex constructions. But oral is more personal pronouns are used in oral communication, and fewer personal pronouns are used in written communication, like you, I, and this and that is used in oral. But in written, it is normally used like the researcher has said this. It is normally in passive sentences for formal written communication. And oral is less detailed technical information containing, and written communication contains more detailed technical information. Oral communication requires and generates prompt action, but written communication generates delayed action. Oral communication focus on interpersonal relationships basically, but in written communication we focus on the content. So the written channel is often preferred when the message is long, technical, and formal in nature, and message must be documented. And the oral channel is effective when the message is urgent or personal, or when immediate feedback is important. So these guidelines can change when whether your receiver is from another country. For example, in countries like Europe and Asia, complex messages are usually dealt with orally, with written documents provided only later if necessary. Like we say that if there is something complex and requires certain explanations, so we do what we speak on phone and we deal everything, and for just for the sake of documentation we provide the documentation later if they are necessary. So uh, then is uh, then is receiver. Your message is delivered to individual members of your audience. So your receiver is basically decoder. The receiver decoder is influenced by the context and by his or her mental filter. The message receiver is your reader or listener is known as the decoder. Many of your messages may have more than one decoder. So uh, no doubt you have in mind the actions or reactions you hope your message will get from this audience. So, uh, both if we here in the communication model, the receiver as well as sender are influenced by the context. If we see in the model, both the receiver and the sender are influenced by the context. Okay, it's not only the sender is influenced, both the receiver and sender are influenced by this context. So both receive messages through eyes and ears, but are also influenced by non-verbal factors such as touch, taste, smell, all the factors which are not verbal but they affect the message. All the factors of message are filtered through the receiver. Receiver's point of view and receiver's views of and experiences of the world, or receiver's perceptions. So but one problem is that we do not all undergo the identical experiences with the subject or the symbol that is being discussed that the sender has chosen. So even within the country, like attitudes, abilities, opinions, communication skills and cultural customs are different, are varying. So add another country into the communication process and the problems increase. So therefore, miscommunication can occur when a personal biases and individual values cause the receiver to misinterpret the sender's intended message actually. So context basically affects both the sender and receiver. And a receiver does what? It decodes the message encoded by the sender. Just as encoding is a success, just as successful encoding is a skill, so is successful decoding is a skill. Decoding involving, for example, taking the time to read a message carefully or listen actively to it, give the due time. Just as confusion can arise from errors in encoding, it can also arise from decoding errors. This is particularly the case if the decoder does not have enough knowledge to understand the message. So they should also prepare adequately in order to overcome the communication barriers. Last is feedback. Feedback is very important. Ultimately, the receiver reacts with either the desired response based on a clear understanding of the symbols or with an undesired response because of miscommunication. So, at the receiver end, both can be clear understanding or miscommunication. And if there is clear understanding, the desired result is achieved by the sender. If there is misunderstanding, undesired response is would be achieved, miscommunication, because of miscommunication. So feedback would be telling whether it is a desired response is generated or undesired response is generated. So feedback can be oral or written. It can also be an action, such as it should not always be written. Feedback should not be a form of communication. It can be even in the form of action, like such as receiving in the mail an item you ordered. Sometimes silence is used as feedback, though it is almost always ineffective, but it is a feedback that senders send that the receiver gives a message that they don't give importance, or they don't want to talk about it, or they don't want to talk to you even. So these are the silence is even also a communicator or feedback. Senders need feedback in order to determine the success or failure of the communication. So it is very important, so that sender takes the idea whether the communication has achieved its purpose or not. The components described earlier, uh, these represent what happens in communication. A context exists in which a sender chooses, here in the communication model, here here the uh, context exists in which a sender chooses a message to communicate, and the sender must also choose the medium for a message. A receiver decodes the message and provides feedback. Also, this linear description seems relatively very simple, but problems can occur at any point of the communication. So here if we summarize, sender is it is depends upon the encoding depends upon the sender's experience, attitude, skills, perception, idea encoding, simple symbol decision, sending mechanisms, etc. Context is the background or the environment or the stimulus which affect both sender and receiver. And receiver is who he the receiver decodes the idea according to experiences, attitude, skills, and receptor mechanism, perception and decoding, and idea interpretation. And the messages in the message itself can be either oral or written. Medium depends upon the whether it is verbal or non-verbal. So then receiver receives the idea through this medium and gives a feedback in the form of verbal or non-verbal or action to the sender. In this way, the communication process is completed. So this was all about the components of communication. So now we will be moving forward towards problems of communication.